Welcome to the Book Faire podcast. My name is Anthony, and this week we have an interview with Stan Yan. Texas brings forth a new school funding bill. An AI reading list recommends books that don't exist. And a mother allegedly purchases gear for her son's planned school shooting. Let's begin first with an interview with Stan Yan, author and illustrator of upcoming graphic novel The Many Misadventures of Eugenia Wang. Stan, how are you doing today?
Oh, I'm doing good. How are you doing?
I'm doing very well today. Can you start us off by introducing yourself to the audience and talking a little bit about the book we'll be discussing today?
Yeah, my name is Stan Yan, and I'm a graphic novelist. I'm also currently the co-regional advisor of the Rocky Mountain chapter of the Society of Children's Book Writers and Illustrators, and I'm a caricature artist, and I'm also an instructor. I teach at the Rocky Mountain College of Art and Design. I teach sequential art there, although I've been on sabbatical for a couple of years, and I'm co-founding professor at the Cuttlefish Academy online kidlit art school. And the book that is coming out at the end of September is actually my traditionally published debut, The Many Misfortunes of Eugenia Wang, which is coming out from Athenaeum Books for younger readers.
Give us an idea of who Eugenia Wang is and why misfortunes are plaguing her.
So she is a 12-year-old Chinese American student who is someone who really, I guess if she had her way, she would be a comic artist like myself. But, just like a lot of Chinese American kids, there's a lot of conflict with what the parents see as being an optimal, academic and career path for their children, and that typically doesn't include art. Anyway, one day, so one of the misfortunes that she has is that she doesn't really, get her way, but she also doesn't really like to rock the boat very much at the beginning of the story. But one day she gets hit in the head by her best friend's sneaker in PE class, and she starts to have these weird dreams or visions about her impending doom. And so that's another one of her misfortunes. And as she gets close, but this was also kind of a pivot point because her injury, I guess, kind of opens some arguments with her mom about her own priorities, but it also gets her thinking about what she really wants to do, and she feels like she wants to rebel in all the different ways. And one of the things that is a point of conflict between her mom and herself is that she has never, to this date in her life, gotten to celebrate her birthday on her actual birthday because it's on April 4th or 4/4, and because of her mom's Chinese superstition that 4 is an unlucky number. And at the beginning of the book, it mentions that it's a homophone. The Cantonese word for 4 and the Cantonese word for death are almost identical, and that is one of the reasons that in Chinese culture 4 is considered an unlucky number. But she's trying to have a secret party with her best friend Keisha for her own birthday at her friend's house. So they're planning on rebelling and doing things against mom's wishes.
And Stan, you bring up, against mom's wishes, her mom pressuring her. One of the things that happens throughout this book is that her mother will often bring up Eugenia's grandmother as a reason for why she needs to obey what the mother is saying that I believe it's Popo did not give you all of this to waste your opportunities on art, something to that effect.
Right, right. And it's basically, that you respect your elders. And so, even if you disagree with what your elders say, you are supposed to respect them. And it doesn't matter where you grew up, even if you grew up here. And I unfortunately have kind of come head to head with that cultural expectation when my dad got remarried, and and had a little bit of conflict with my new stepmom because of that exact thing. That's probably why I ended up in this book.
Taking that aspect from life, as well as taking Eugenia herself being a an aspiring artist, and even having the main character, being Chinese American. How important is it for this story and the way that it's kind of developed? Was it to put so much of yourself into it?
um, Originally, um, I felt like, I mean, the original concept behind this book was just that I wanted to write and illustrate a comic book that actually scared me, because I felt like, in spite of the fact that um, comics has a rich history of horror, it never really did the job for me like movies or novels did. It doesn't have the ability to add sound or have the editor force the pacing, of how you read it, um, on you. And then, when I'm reading a novel, my visual imagination does a lot of the heavy lifting. so, so, I was trying to kind of figure out, what in a comic would work well for making a scary story. And originally, it wasn't that it had to be a children's story either. But when I sat there and analyzed what really scared me in the pop culture that I consumed, a lot of times it was because there was a child involved. So I was like, okay, I need to write the story where the protagonist is also a child, because then they haven't, dismissed the possibilities of what can or can't happen in the paranormal world or whatever. And um, and it, so when I originally wrote this, at least my Chinese culture wasn't in it at all. And then, but then, you know, I had been taking my children's book around, my picture book, um, there's a zombie in the basement, to a bunch of school visits, and for, I don't know, maybe a year or two. But then I started reading some books by other Chinese American authors, um, Andrea Wang, Kelly Yang, Grace Lin, Lisa Yi. And I was like, oh my gosh, they've got main characters that are Chinese American. And I had never even, with my picture book, I hadn't even thought about making the main character, who was inspired by my son, who looks like me, anything but a redheaded white kid. Um, and it got me thinking about myself a little bit and why I hadn't done that, um, or what were the reasons behind my decision to do that. Because for me, it was reflexive. I didn't even decide. It was just a given that my main character had to be white. And then I started thinking about my own history of reading, and what were the books that I was reading in the school library growing up. And I could not think of one book that had a Chinese or Chinese American character, except for The Five Chinese Brothers, which didn't really make me feel that good about myself as a Chinese person. And at that point, I was like, I'm going to make my main character Chinese, and he's going to be basically me growing up in the early 1980s. And so this early rendition of um, the Many Misfortunes of Eugenia Wang, um, um, took that turn. And then eventually, after getting a manuscript critique during the pandemic with an editor at Chronicle, she had convinced me to, don't, make it a period piece, make it contemporary. And there were too many things going on because the main character was going into these visions of his impending doom through his sense of smell. So it was called olfactory memory. She's like, oh, that's too many superpowers or whatever. So I was like, well, how am I going to make my main character get into these visions if that's not a part of it? In the interim, I had visited with enough schools that I talked to a lot of librarians that were really excited by anything scary because they're like, oh, kids just love scary books. And a lot of them had said, on many occasions, they said, I wish there were more scary books for girls. And so I was like, you know what? Let's gender swap my main character, and hopefully that will open up opportunities for, these readers to have a book for them. And so that's how Eugenia Wang became Eugenia Wang and not Morty Chen. And so I mean, I think at the point that I had made him my main character Chinese, that was when it became very important for me to instill more of myself and my background into the story. Now, and I think one of the reasons I had avoided doing it for so long was because a lot of what was being published at the time were like all of these um, stories about how difficult it was to deal with things like the racism of being Chinese American or Asian American and growing up in the US, and all the institutionalized racism that no one ever talked about, the microaggressions and whatnot. And I was like, well, I don't really feel like me being myself, having moved to white suburban Denver in, you know, when I was less than a year old, how can I speak for a culture of over 1 billion people? But I've since come to realize, you know what? I only have to write a story that reflects my own background and what I went through. So that's kind of what I did. And most of my characters are loosely based on family members. So even though Eugenia Wang is a comic artist, she's really mostly based on my sister. Um, and her contentious relationship with her mom is what I witnessed growing up between my sister and mom.
And you mentioned microaggressions is probably one of the most important words to latch on in that whole thing, in that whole explanation. It was really well put. Thank you so much for that. I think that the thing that encapsulates that entire background, that entire history is at the very beginning of the story when Eugenia says she doesn't want to be a stereotypical Asian. It kind of encapsulates that entire idea of uh, seeing the lack of representation in media, seeing how society views how society views certain ethnic groups and certain races of people. And then once that was in the story, once you made that conscious decision to make the story of not exactly autobiographical, but reflecting real elements, how hard was it to keep those scary themes uh, constant throughout the story? Because you did want to make a book that scared you. So
Yeah,
when it
well,
came to including yourself, how was the
it actually
process?
became easier. I think once I did the last major revision and made, Morty Chen, Eugenia Wang. I mean, the problem was this. So this was my bucket list thing. I had to write and illustrate a comic that scared me. But when I was writing Olfactory Memory, it became, you know pretty clear early on that it didn't scare me anymore. But I love the story, and so I just kind of pushed through. But in the process of rewriting it and personalizing it a little bit more, I was actually able to put in some elements that just even thinking about them, they kind of raise goosebumps on me because there's like automatic drawing and things like she doesn't know, you know, who changed things in the comic that she's drawing because at the beginning of the story, after she gets hit in the head and has her first vision, she wants to remember it because it's so weird, and so she draws a comic about it. And so all the way through the story, she's, you know, continuing to draw the comic, and at points in time it kind of changes itself. So the comic is a reflection of things that she starts to believe are premonitions of her impending doom. And so at that point she wants to try changing them, but whatever the unseen force is that is either drawing this or channeling themselves through her to draw these or change these things won't let her change certain things or makes her change certain things, you know. Um, so yeah, in that way, it made it way scarier because, you know, as a comic artist, I'm like, well, what would scare me is maybe if someone, you know, was messing with my comics.
Is it somebody messing with your comics, or is it the idea of unconsciously altering your own work, or even adding things that you're adding things at a subconscious level that you're not consciously
Yeah,
wanting
I think
to
all of
confront?
the above because, you know, for me, I'm kind of a control freak. I want to have control of the things that I do. And so like sometimes when I do school visits, like the theme behind my picture book is that you don't have to be afraid of you know, imaginary things. And so on the last page of my picture book, it says, what are you scared of? Draw a picture of it here. So I do an interactive monster drawing demo and I ask the kids, you know, what they're scared of and try to draw um, a non-scary version of what they're scared of while I'm showing them how to use simple geometric shapes to do character designs that are repeatable. But often they ask me, well, what am I scared about? And my answer to that is easy and pretty direct, and it's traumatic head injuries. Because for me, if I get a traumatic head injury, then I might lose control over the things that I want to have control of in my life. And so I always tell them, you know, if you ever go to the roller rink and you see a guy and a son, you know, only two people wearing helmets at the roller rink, that's probably me and my son.
And so when you have that fear of head injuries, the way that you make that kind of abstract, and it's very easy to imagine the way that you kind of abstract that and to make it humorous and make it absurd is like, you know, you got the big baseball bat or maybe a mallet, something like that, and just kind of play it up, you know. I can understand like that's so easy to break down and to make not scary anymore.
Yeah. I mean, in this case, it's just her best friend's shoe that is the, you know, point of trauma. But I don't know if you noticed or not, since you were um, you got the PDF, so everything was in color, and you know how I was playing a little bit with colors and the color red in particular. That you noticed that Keisha's shoe was red, her glasses are red, and then the dreams, the threatening dreams and visions are all in red as well. So, is that a red herring? I don't know. Everyone will have to read it to find out.
So anytime there is scary stories targeting young audiences, one of the easiest ways to go about that is by exploring the ways in which the younger characters are being given agency. What are some of the ways that you go about giving Eugenia a way to control things in her situation as she is facing this kind of existential threat of impending doom?
Right. I mean, we talked a little bit about her rebellion, and that's her trying to have some agency over her relationship with her mom, and then which gives her maybe a little bit more bravery when it comes to inviting Enrique, her crush, to the secret birthday party that she's planning with Keisha. And um, but I think, you know, one of the things is is kind of just the thought of what you can or can't control. Because there's certainly a lot of things that this unseen force, I mean, as she's trying to have some agency and change what she thinks might be her fate and her future, that it won't let happen. Um, and not surprisingly, the feedback that I'd gotten from that editor at Chronicle was during the pandemic, and one of the things that she really felt like was a message that was needed at that point was that sometimes the best way to help ourselves is to help other people. And at that time during the pandemic lockdown, that was definitely on the front of everyone's mind. Is we're wearing masks not to help ourselves, but to help everyone else, that kind of thing. And I was like, wow, that's kind of a good idea. And so I felt like I wanted to tie that into what this unseen force was allowing her to do and not to do, and how that affected what you know was being manifested by what she was trying to do.
You've mentioned a little bit about the editorial process. I always love to give a little bit of insight into the more business side of things because there's a lot of aspiring authors that just think that you write a manuscript and then you just throw it out there into the world. Can you talk a little bit about the process of receiving notes from editors? What was your personal reaction to some of these notes? Did you find any difficulty in adapting to any notes as you went along?
Well, for me, like none of the stories that I've been writing, even though they're all um, my passion projects, I'm not that precious about them. For me, my main goal is to get my books into as many readers' hands as possible. And so I was like, I need to get traditionally published because I've been a self-published comic artist for, gosh, 25 years. But I felt like I was spinning my wheels, and I felt like, you know what, I'm dedicated enough that I've been trying to make this my living, although, it is like a diversified portfolio of investments where, I'm doing caricature gigs to make money, I'm teaching to make money. So, it's really kind of a three-pronged thing. But I felt like my best way of reaching as many readers as possible was to try to go about getting traditionally published, because I don't know of too many self-published authors that you know have award-winning books that are in their 25th anniversary editions that get also made into a movie or anything like that. And granted, all of that stuff is like winning the lotto, but it's also something that you have intellectual property ownership of, at least at this point. I know that the AI bros, tech bros, are trying to, you know, rain on our parade right now. But at least theoretically, that's the idea that I was going for. So I ended up shortly before I started writing this book, and shortly after I wrote "There's a Zombie in the Basement," I joined the Society of Children's Book Writers and Illustrators, which was great because it kind of gave me a roadmap that, oh, you know what? Not only is they're a roadmap, but they're telling me how to, get traditionally published. You query agents, get an agent. That's, the key master to the editorial gatekeepers at these trade publishers. And it wasn't something I had ever experienced within the, comic book industry, where it just seemed like, everyone that you heard that was, drawing for Marvel or DC got in a way that no one expected. But by the time they told you that's the way to get into it, then they've closed up that, you know, barrier in their gatekeeping process. so, um, it was, that's what I decided to do, is to try to do that, with the understanding also that so much of what I do, like the caricatures, is so physically demanding that, and I'm not getting any younger. I don't want to be someone that doesn't have any opportunity for a passive income stream. because, once I draw a caricature, that's it. I don't make any royalties off of it. And uh, I didn't want to be having to work a birthday party when I'm 75 years old if I'm not physically able to make a couple $100.
Right. It's funny you talk about wanting to get your books out there into as many hands as possible, and that the way of doing that is getting traditionally published. Like I'm very passionate about children's literature. I used to work in children's theater, and I told my wife when I started this podcast, like, I'm going to be doing this out of the love of it because because I care about it. I love the work.
Right.
I love talking to authors, but the end game is to sell the podcast. Like if this became the Scholastic Book Fair podcast or the Penguin Rant, like pay me whatever you want and I'll only highlight your books. I don't mind. That's where I wanted to go, but the heart of it is still there of wanting to get the message out there and wanting to highlight stories. So
Yeah,
I
yeah. And it's
absolutely
not something that you go after because it's easy money either. I mean,
no.
I started writing Olfactory Memory in 2016, and it's coming out this year. So if you're planning on, um, making that your primary income, I hope you can starve for a few years. I think the main thing is that it's my passion. So, I was doing it even when, I wasn't planning on doing it for my career. I worked as a stockbroker for 13 years and, working 10-hour days, and then I'd come home and draw for 3 or 4 hours a night because it's what I wanted to do, and when I go to school visits and people ask me about that, about how I do this for a living, I'm like, well, that's not really the important thing. The important thing was that it was my passion and I made time for it because I feel like, it makes for better mental health, which turns into better physical health for me. And I always ask the kids, okay, how many of your parents are passionate about golf? And of course, a bunch of hands go up. And I'm like, how many of your parents are on the PGA Tour? And they all lower their hands. I'm like, that's what I'm talking about. But they're passionate about it, they made time for it. So even if you're not doing this for a living, you know, I think the more important thing is to think about what about it makes you passionate, because I feel like your life will be more rewarding no matter what you're doing for money. you know the money part of it isn't necessarily intrinsically related to it. I mean, you're lucky if you can get those two things to go together, but I've got just as many friends that are artists that started doing it for a living and lost their passion for it, or they don't have time for the passion project or the stories that they want to tell. And that was the case for me for a few years because I was teaching summer camps and I was teaching at a community college and doing all these comic conventions and character gigs, and all of that is fun and rewarding, but it wasn't my passion. And for a few years there, I didn't have time to work on writing my own stories anymore. So all of those people that had been buying my comic books at comic book conventions would come back and say, "Do you have a new book out?" And I'd say no, and all of my fan base quickly dwindled away. So, yep.
I appreciate that we got into this nice deep conversation about the passion and the work and the love of it, because I always like to end on this same last question, and it usually comes out of nowhere as a very deep existential question, and that is, Stan, how do you view yourself and the work that you do as a writer or as an illustrator?
um I don't know. For me, I feel like it's out there. I mean, my main goal used to be only to just make people laugh or entertain people or evoke some sort of emotional response out of them. I mean, for me, the passionate part of it isn't actually the illustration. It's not necessarily the process of writing, although I feel a lot of joy in that, but it's the unsolicited feedback I get from strangers who have read my stuff. Um, that is the addictive part of it for me. And that is the reason that I really want my books to get out to as many readers as possible. Not, I mean, granted, I would like to make as much money in the process as possible as well, but, you know, uh, my pursuit of this medium has not always resulted in money, but yet I continue to persist. Now, granted, I'm not a person that quits very quickly and easily at things, even if they aren't very fun, like being a stockbroker or very lucrative. But I think that's proof in and of itself that this is what I should be doing. And I think since more recently, it's become more important that I want people that are reading my work not only to be entertained, but also to think about themselves a little bit more, be a little bit more introspective. I've been doing some single panel gags recently that are upologies.com and Last Man on Earth, which are basically meant to people to look at themselves in the mirror a little bit and what kind of legacies they're leaving behind. And granted, I feel a lot more proud about the work that I'm doing now that I'm doing kidlit as far as my own legacy, but I also want the people that are reading my work to make this a better world, you know. And is that going to be the case because they're laughing at some of the toilet humor in my work? No, probably not. But I also feel like there's different messages that you can put in fiction that makes people think a little bit more about their day-to-day human interactions. And I'm hoping that my books have a positive impact in that area as well.
Thank you. That was an interview with Stan Yan. His graphic novel, The Many Misadventures of Eugenia Wang, releases on September 30th. You can find more about Stan and his work at stanyan.me. Coming up next, we'll be highlighting notable new releases, but first, if you appreciate the work being done with the Book Faire podcast, there are a few ways to show your support. First, you can like, comment, favorite, subscribe, or follow, etc., the podcast wherever you are currently listening to help push it out to new listeners. Second, you can follow the podcast on Blue Sky at BookFairPod. You can also go to patreon.com/thebookfair, where you can find episodes posted early, as well as links to news sources used throughout the show. Lastly, and most importantly, the best way to support the Book Faire podcast is simply to share it with a friend, an educator, or a young reader in your life. Now, on with the show. Now, let's begin looking at notable new releases, beginning with Amina Banana and the Formula of Friendship by Shifa Saltagi Safadi, with illustrations by Aaliya Jaleel. Optimistic about her family's move from Syria to Indiana, science-minded third grader Amina creates a 4-step formula for making friends. But students mock her English-speaking skills, and when a potential new friend, Crystal, attempts to reassure her, quote, "Don't worry, I don't bite," Amina grows concerned, saying, quote, "Americans bite each other?" National Book Award winner Safadi and illustrator Jaleel re-team up to compassionately capture the whirlwind first days of Amina's life in the United States in this heartfelt and purpose-driven chapter book series opener. Further incidents highlight how idiom-rich English is often confusing for Amina. When a student insists Amina spill the beans on full, a Syrian fava bean dish, Amina takes the phrase literally. Though she's embarrassed by her perceived faux pas, it leads to empathetic overtures of friendship. Quote, "It must be confusing for you to hear all these phrases," one classmate says, followed by Crystal's promise to meet Amina where she's at. Animated black and white artwork depicts friendly-faced, visually diverse students. Back matter includes a taste experiment, recipe, and note about the Syrian refugee crisis. Publishing simultaneously with another in the series, Amina Banana and the Formula for Winning. This book is recommended for ages 6 to 9. Next up, Gus and Glory by Sarah Guillory. In a heart-tugging and hopeful novel from Guillory, a rambunctious bloodhound bounding nose first through life proves to be the glue that bonds a 12-year-old to biological and found families. Aspiring detective Gloria St. Romain feels out of sorts when she's sent to stay with her mother's estranged parents, Nana Pat and Papa Jack, in small, sweltering Sweet Olive, Louisiana. With her trucker father on the road, the young mystery fan is determined to make the most of her time by cracking the case of where her mom has gone, which is surely not on vacation, like Dad says. Glory finds some assistance in sniffing out clues at a neighborhood park when she encounters Gus, a big, wrinkly dog attracted to her peanut butter and jelly sandwich. Sweet and slobbery Gus proves a cherished companion who helps lead Glory to new friends, a healing relationship with her steadfast grandparents, and difficult truths about her mother. In a smartly balanced novel that strikes notes tough and tender, Glory's forthright observational narration renders the child's warm connection with Papa Jack, appreciation of Gus's innate talents and capacity for empathy, and feelings about showing up for loved ones. This book is recommended for ages 8 to 12. Next up, Let Them Stare by Julie Murphy and Jonathan Van Ness. A queer teen uncovers secrets from their town's past in this heartfelt novel by Murphy and Van Ness. Non-binary teen Sully's plan for fleeing small-town Hearst, Pennsylvania after graduation collapses when their internship with a New York City-based influencer is suddenly canceled. Upon discovering a pristine vintage leather bag at a thrift store, a new plan is born. But the bag is haunted by Rufus, the sassy ghost of a 1950s, quote, female impersonator, with no recollection of his past. Rufus promises to vacate the bag if Sully helps him unlock his memory. To gain access to Hearst's archival records, Sully agrees to help their city council member mother unsnarl an ownership dispute that could upend regressive, wealthy Beauregard Hearst's control of the town. Sully soon teams up with preppy, gay classmate Brad, and the duo soon stumbles onto messy and potentially groundbreaking discoveries. The collaborators seamlessly connect Rufus's and Sully's stories, showing through both the resilience of queer life and the bigotry they each face. Messages of acceptance are wrapped in a romp that moves beyond simple platitudes. This book is recommended for ages 14 and up. And lastly, One Day in June, a story inspired by the life and activism of Marsha P. Johnson, by Tourmaline and illustrated by Charlot Kristensen. In front of a purple timepiece whose design resembles the Reese Park Memorial Clock, a crowd enjoys the surf and sand. Quote, Marsha sure does love this scene, an unnamed author declares. Do you know who Marsha is? The following pages introduce activist Marsha P. Johnson, a black trans woman describing in reverent lines and anecdotes the way she moved through the world. She loved people just as they were, and she had a good time doing it. Tourmaline movingly explains how people still benefit from the figure's work, and how Johnson's dedication to creating change by showing up for others has never been more alive. Alternating between historical scenes and depictions of a modern-day protest at the Brooklyn Museum, Kristen's electric-hued illustrations focus solidly on community, affectionately painting Johnson as a larger-than-life star who passed her deep knowledge to others. An author's note concludes, and this book is recommended for ages 4 to 8. Next, on to some news, beginning with a school funding bill from Texas. Only 2 weeks ago, Texas signed into law Governor Abbott's longtime pet project of school vouchers, which could strip billions from public schools and hand them to families enrolling students in private institutions. And now that the bill has passed, the Texas legislature has seemed to finally remember to fund public schools as well, with Senate Bill 2 finally being heard in committee. A refresher for how most states work, the bills are numbered by the order that they are introduced. Senate Bill 2 was one of the first bills filed, the second to be exact, and is only now just being entered into committee in the Senate with less than a month remaining in the 2025 legislative session. The bill is a companion to House Bill 2, which passed early in the session and includes an increase in teacher salaries and limiting hiring for educators without formal classroom training. The bill left the House with some concessions and differs in the raises originally proposed, though the differences are nominal. However, it's likely that this bill will finally pass the Senate by the end of the legislative session in June and will give an increase in funding to public schools. Next, Chicago Sun-Times prints a summer reading list using AI, adding books that didn't exist. This week, several newspapers published a syndicated reading list that included made-up titles by real authors. Victor Lim, marketing director of Chicago Times' parent company, Chicago Public Media, said that the list was provided by King Features, which provides licensed content to newspapers nationwide. The list's writer, Marco Buscaglia, has claimed responsibility, saying that it was partially generated by AI. Quote, "Huge mistake on my part and has nothing to do with the Sun-Times. They trust that the content they purchase is accurate, and I betrayed that trust. It's on me 100%. End quote. This story highlights the dangers of relying on artificial intelligence for writing. A Book Riot editor on Blue Sky said, quote, "This is the future of book recommendations, when libraries are defunded and dismantled. Trained professionals are removed in exchange for this made-up, inaccurate garbage." End quote. According to NPR, the list is dated May 18th, which comes 2 months after the Chicago Sun-Times announced 20% of its staff had accepted buyouts. Next up, a chilling story from San Antonio, Texas, of a mother aiding her son's school shooting plot. On May 12th, police arrested a 13-year-old boy suspected of plotting an act of mass violence at Rhodes Middle School in San Antonio, Texas. The boy's name has not been released, but his mother, Ashley Pardo, has also been arrested shortly after and charged with aiding in commission of terrorism. The charges allege that she provided ammunition and tactical gear to her son, whose behavior demonstrated plans for mass-targeted violence at Rhodes Middle School. In January, staff at the middle school were alerted to troubling drawings and a fascination with past mass shooters. In April, the child used a school computer to research a shooting at a mosque in New Zealand. He was suspended and on the same day tried to commit suicide, resulting in over 100 stitches. In May, he returned to Rhodes Middle School, and the school tightened security as a result of his behavior. This is when his grandmother discovered him playing with a live bullet and learns that it was given to him by his mother. The mother, Ashley Pardo, also took the boy to a military surplus store, buying him ammunition, a tactical vest, and helmet. The boy told his grandmother on the way to school he was going to be famous and something about, quote, 14 words, which is a shorthand for a white supremacist slogan. The grandmother looked through the boy's bedroom and found live ammunition and an improvised explosive device. At 8:39 a.m. on May 12th, the grandmother called local police. Pardo and her son were soon taken into custody, with the mother being released on bond. This story is a grim and tragic one, but it could have been so much worse without the grandmother taking action to alerting the authorities. However, there are too many instances throughout the country where warning signs are ignored. Thankfully, the incident was resolved without anyone being harmed. And now finishing the episode with a lighthearted story to change up the mood. Harry Potter tours in Edinburgh being replaced with LGBTQ+ history walks. Transphobe and author of the Harry Potter series J.K. Rowling has been unable to avoid news coverage for her problematic stance on trans people. As a result, Street Historians, provider of walking tours in Edinburgh, Scotland, announced they will be replacing Harry Potter tours in the city with tours focusing on LGBTQ+ history. In a statement, Street Historians founder Fraser Horn said, quote, "There's an increasing amount of negativity around the series which is making it much harder to conjure up affection. For that reason, the Edinburgh Street Historians are having internal discussions," end quote. While the company could have simply paused the tours, they have made a bold move to show their support for the LGBTQ+ community by offering queer history tours for Pride Month. Fraser Horn has hinted that the Harry Potter tours may return after June, but has not confirmed the organization's plans yet. I hope that it is finally time to put the Harry Potter series to rest, as the author's hateful stance and activism against queer people has stained the legacy. Street Historians founder Fraser Horn says it best, quote, "There comes a point where it's harder to justify," end quote. This will conclude another episode of the Book Faire podcast. This week has been a rare chance for me to focus on writing an outline for the show since the spring semester of college has ended. I hope that the effort doesn't go unnoticed. If you want to read more of any of these stories, links to sources can be found at patreon.com/thebookfair. Thank you very much for listening, and as always, I'll talk at you next time.